Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities and Miniatures. It's Friday, which means once more it's time for some obscurities in literature. Well, sort of kind of. This isn't really literature per se, but it's a book. But we're going to look today at the Mars Attacks 50th Anniversary Collection. And no, you can't have my bonus trading cards because they're not in the book anymore. First things first, though. I've been a big fan of Mars Attacks, and I'm trying to remember where I even stumbled upon its legacy. I think just being a nerd growing up and being interested in sci-fi stuff and attending a lot of collectible events and being in the, comic book world in the 80s and 90s. I think it just kind of like tangentially ended up becoming something I was familiar with. But anyway, this book is really cool for a couple of different reasons. But the first reason is I love the fact that the cover itself is just like the old wax wrapping paper that if you ever bought old trading cards back in the day, you were probably all too familiar with. Just a really neat idea. And coincidentally enough, there are a couple other books that have been put out in this library of old trading cards collected into a book form. I'm really curious about the Garbage Pail ones. I have never seen those in person, but the cool thing is also you've got the stick of gum, and that's usually what it looked like when you got it. So, I think the biggest interest for me was always the quality of the artwork. And what's interesting about this is not only do you have all the original cards with a little blurb, there's a quick thing about the history here written by Len Brown, who was involved in the original publication of Mars Attacks, the original cards. But then you get all sorts of other interesting stuff, which we'll go into as well. So I'm sure if you've ever spent any time in science fiction nerddom, you probably came across this stuff, but it does have both the front and the back of every card nice and big where you can see it. And these are the original unedited, unaltered versions. There do exist some versions where they tried to tone down the art, and I don't think those ever got released to the public, but just the absolute carnage that these cards had on them depicted in 1962 of all things was just pretty wild. This is not something you usually saw going on, and to me it's just the destruction, the wanton violence, people getting vaporized. They were having a lot of fun doing these, I think. Dudes on fire. Where's the destroying the dog one? You've got all the burned up skeletons and stuff as the Martians invade. Everybody on fire. I'm getting these melted people. And then you get into the interesting cards here. I always remember the burning flesh one. Yeah, they're pretty horrific for the time. I mean, they're still pretty bad. There is a bit of sexual tinge to them. Who knows what he's going to do with his captive? Good old burning cattle. Forgot about the frost ray. And I'm just kind of glancing through these. Mantic did actually put out a really nice tabletop game a few years back through Kickstarter. I don't think the game's even available anymore. It used a pared down rule set based on their Dead Zone game, and it was a lot of fun, actually, I thought. Unfortunately, impaled victims. The giant bugs. Did I pass my favorite of destroying the dog? Just a lot of flares. The classic. Yeah. All of its wrongness. So yeah, you have all the original cards here with a little blurb about each of them. Plenty of destruction. Plenty of violence. Not as much of the depravity as we would see in the remake cards later on. I always like once they get to Mars and whoop all their butts and... yeah, I'm smashing the Martians' heads and literally smashing the enemy. Oh, poor Martians. Good old giant robots. You got to point out the nice bloody cleats on it as it stomps thing. And then Mars explodes. Was that the final card? Yeah, but not the checklist was, but yeah. Definitely a very exciting and controversial thing for its time. And I'm sure if I had been a kid back then, I would have been all over this. And I hated collecting trading cards of any kind because it always seemed like I'd always end up with too many of the wrong ones and never the ones that I really wanted. That was always a frustration. But yeah, I can remember seeing the artwork at conventions, and you know, obviously as they got closer to the movie being released, Topps was getting into the comic book market, and they did do a re-release, and I'm pretty sure that's where I'd seen a lot of these. And then you had a lot of actual art that was inspired by the original, and they actually kept the original numbering because the first 55 were the original set. And then they had a whole bunch of modern artists hopping in there to do their interpretation. And I know they had a comic book series because I was reading it at the time. Keith Giffen definitely did those. You had a lot of famous artists involved. Is that... I thought that was a Drew Friedman piece. Have to have a new take on the classic. Bisley and John Bolton, two of my favorites. Fassner and Larson. Keith Giffen and Sam Keith. Mike Ploog, that's a name you haven't heard lately. Funny enough, Zena Saunders is actually the daughter of the artist who did, Norm Saunders, who did a lot of the original artwork. Just kind of cool. Ken Stacy, William Stout, who doesn't do much these days, unfortunately. And I want to say some of these were based on, like, the model kits. Yeah, there were a bunch of model kits, I remember, like big vinyl kits that were released in the late 90s. No, mid-90s, sorry, this is 95. I can remember seeing these at local shops. And I'm trying to remember, there was a short line of books published, I think around the time the movie came out, which is where these come from. I want to say, was this the one? I had one of them where it was like the Martians landed near like a Winchester Mystery House type building on the coastline of California, I believe. I think it was this book. But here's one of the cool parts. Now, Hollywood, who did a lot of the science fiction stuff for EC Comics, you know, like weird science, weird fantasy, and actually was very influential in the design of these Martians, actually helped come up with a lot of the early inspirational art here, which I think outside of this book, I've never seen anywhere. So that's a really cool treat, and I'm not going to spoil it all for you guys, but there is a whole pile of interesting early rough sketches for this stuff. And not only that, but they have all of the various packaging, display box, wrappers, fun stuff like that. And in the back here we get into some of the alternate artwork where it was far less violent and a little bit too docile and tame for me. Where's half the fun here? Look, the guy's in one piece again. It may not be the most culturally respectful version of the Chinese countryside, but oh, yeah, this used to be a Beast of the Beauty. This is the one where the guy used to be the lady getting kidnapped. But yeah. And now, instead of the girl getting captured, we have some random boy. Fun stuff. But yeah, cool little look through the history of a very infamous set of cards that inspired the movie, that inspired comics of all sorts, that, you know, I think the prototypical bug-eyed alien absolutely was very much influenced by, you know, Wally Wood's art anyways, so why not have him get involved? But just a cool little book. And honestly, after dragging this out again to do a video on it, I'm kind of curious to see what other books are still out there that are in publication that aren't going to be costing me an arm and a leg to see what they're like. You know, I guess the only downside is it's a little bit small. It's, you know, much smaller than a standard sized book, a little bit larger than a typical paperback. And, you know, it's not like these cards were meant to be blown up to ridiculous proportions, but it would have been a little bit nicer to see the art full size, or maybe if it had been done, you know, with the pages flipped or something, to have the cards like that. I don't know, just a thought. If this ever gets a re-release or, second edition or something like that. But just a cool, fun little book for, obviously, somebody who was not born at the time these came out. With that said, this has been High Lord Tamerlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye-bye.